Yeah, this is my third video for the day. And this is my discussion on uh, Ric Flair's book, "To Be the Man." Um, what's inspired me to do this is I was watching True Slayer's video in defense of Vince Russo, and it reminded me of this book because Ric Flair also brings up a lot of the points that True Slayer did. But I'll talk about that in a sec. Um, I bought this when I was on holidays in North Carolina, in Greensboro, just because I'd read like a couple books at the time, and so I started reading this, and I picked it up and read it, and it's a really interesting book. Like, talks about his early life when he was how he was an orphan, uh, going through school. He was crap at it, obviously. I bet you couldn't guess that. Um, how he went to college and flunked out of that, after doing amateur wrestling. He went to Minnesota and trained with Vern Gagne's AWA school, and that was the first thing he didn't quit, and which he actually says that in his book, because Vern Gagne he was going to quit. Now because Vern Gagne's school was really really tough. Like, you'd be taking bump after bump after bump for hours on end. I mean, like, he says like hours, like training that a lot of guys today who are actually in the business wouldn't be able to survive, and how he talks about how one of the trainers there would stretch the wrestlers, and he asked for anyone, or asked for someone to wrestle him, like amateur wrestling, because he'd stretch his students, or he said he could pin any student, and the Iron Sheik was a student at the same time as Ric Flair. So the Iron Sheik went into the mat, went in with him, wrestled with him, and he couldn't pin the Iron Sheik down, and the Iron Sheik was winning it. So he put him in a hold and just broke his, I think, arm or leg. I can't remember. Which is really bad, and talks about how that was how it was back then. You'd stretch the wrestlers. Talks about how he went to the NWA, his plane crash, all that crap. Well, not crap, but it's really interesting stuff. Talks about Jim Crockett Promotions and what went wrong with that. Oh, not what went wrong with it, but what Jim Crockett did, which he shouldn't have done. Like, Starrcade was always held in Greensboro, where I was staying, and what they did was, or what Jim Crockett did was decide to compete with the WWF, because they were doing WrestleMania, and this was their Starrcade, and it was actually Dusty Rhodes' idea. Well, Dusty Rhodes came up with the idea of Starrcade, same with Great American Bash. He thought, well, we should do Starrcade somewhere else, like a bigger city or whatever, more northern, and so they did it in Chicago, and it was a huge failure. And they lost a lot of fans in Greensboro because they didn't do Starrcade in Greensboro that year. Or I think it was Bunkhouse Stampede or something like that in New York, and that was a failure because people in New York didn't know what that was and whatever. I think that's what it's called anyway. He talks about talks about WCW starting, and what went wrong with that, and because he helped bring in Hulk Hogan, because he went to the WWF, and he decided to leave to go back to WCW because it was under new management, and they had and the WWF part is very interesting. He talks about a lot, because he talks about how he had to he had matches with Hogan, but none of them were real success because they wouldn't promote them well enough, or they weren't promoting them like the dream match they were, and that was a big mistake. They were doing them in house shows, just crap like that. You had how he had to drop the title to Bret Hart in a house show because Ultimate Warrior gave him an ear injury, which made him lose his equilibrium, and he had to have surgery for it. And he says occasionally it'll mess up, and he loses his balance, but it's quick to heal. As I was saying, he went back to WCW, and talks about how he helped bring in Hogan, and Hogan helped bring in Nash and Hall and all these other guys from the WWF, and then how politics went out of control with Eric Bischoff, and how he had to leave, and then he came back because of contract things after said he was going to sue. Talked about Vince Russo. Now here, he pretty much says a lot of the same stuff as what Truslayer did, and I wouldn't be surprised if Truslayer has read this. And basically, what he says is Vince Russo was better in the WWF because he didn't have complete control. Because Vince McMahon was, said you can't do this, you can't do that, that's out of control, and then Vince Russo had to come over to WCW, and he had to handle all this backstage politicking from Kevin Nash and whoever else. Hogan talks about, and said that Vince Russo was a nice guy, and he could actually trust him more than Eric Bischoff. But the problem was, he had a lot to put up with, and he didn't know what was going overboard. Like he got buried in. There was an angle where he got buried in the desert by the filthy animals or whatever, and they said, well, we're going to have you out for so and so amount of time. I think it was 6 months or something, or 3 months, and then he was brought back in just a few weeks later when he shouldn't have been, because because Vince Russo really, he had good ideas, but he couldn't just make them work. It was the execution, and he had trouble with that. He doesn't talk about Ed Ferraro, who went to WCW as well. He talks about the dying days of WCW, how he the last Nitro, talks about how he talks about his promo and his match, and the reason why he was wearing a shirt in the match, and it was because he had put on a bit of weight, and the shirt was there to cover it up. So just so you know. Talks about his days in WWE, when he came back. And it pretty much ends in 2004, where he's talking about, where he says, he doesn't drink as much, and he's fixed his relationship with his wife, and then I can't remember when it was, but recently, after this book was published, how him and his wife and him got divorced, and how he's now back on booze because he was arrested and that. But it's a really interesting book and gives you a lot of insight. I might be doing some more book reviews, like on one of Mick Foley's books, or Shawn Michaels' book, or Jerry the King Lawler's book. And if you're within the 5% of wrestling fans who can actually buy a book and read it, that's not me saying that. That was a CM Punk thing that he said, so don't get mad with me. Anyway, yeah, pick up Ric Flair's book, pick up lots of wrestlers' book. They're really interesting. I give you feedback on books you've read, because I probably wouldn't, I might not have read them or whatever. So yeah, books. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, yeah, thanks for watching, subscribe, whatever.